Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan.
It's great to be back.
Our deep dive today is Imam al-Ghazali's The Alchemy of Happiness.
Yes.
A text that a lot of our listeners might already be familiar with.
Yeah.
But we're going to go deep.
Absolutely. It's a really, it's a classic for a reason, right? It's been read and studied for centuries.
Yeah. And it's one of those books that I feel like you can return to again and again and always find something new in it.
And it always feels relevant, right? Like no matter what time period you're in.
Yeah.
Al-Ghazali's insights into human nature and the spiritual path, they resonate across the centuries.
And so what is it about The Alchemy of Happiness that makes it such an enduring work?
Well, I think one of the things that makes it so powerful is how al-Ghazali blends philosophy and theology. He wasn't content with just laying out religious doctrines.
Right.
He wanted to explore the deeper questions of human existence, the nature of the soul, the path to true happiness. I mean, these are questions that have been pondered by philosophers and theologians for millennia, right? But al-Ghazali brought a unique perspective to these inquiries, drawing on both Islamic tradition and his own deep personal experiences. You know, he went through a period of intense spiritual crisis in his life where he was really wrestling with these big existential questions.
Yeah, he was a professor.
He was.
At a very prestigious university.
At a very young age, and he kind of had it all.
Yeah.
Right?
Like worldly success.
Worldly success, recognition, prestige. But he wasn't fulfilled. He was searching for something more. And that search led him on this incredible journey of self-discovery and spiritual exploration.
And so he's writing for people who aren't satisfied with just blind faith. They want to understand the why behind their beliefs, right?
Exactly. He was writing during a period of remarkable intellectual ferment in the Islamic world. And he was right in the thick of it, engaging with philosophers and theologians, scientists, all while trying to reconcile reason and revelation. So it was really this kind of golden age of Islamic scholarship, right?
Yeah.
Where there was this real emphasis on knowledge and critical thinking. And al-Ghazali was a major figure in that movement.
Yeah. So The Alchemy of Happiness, it's his attempt to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah.
To offer a practical guide to living a fulfilling life.
Precisely. It's not just a theoretical treatise on philosophy or theology.
Yeah.
It's a deeply personal and practical guide to navigating the challenges of human existence and finding true lasting happiness.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find really fascinating about The Alchemy of Happiness is al-Ghazali's emphasis on self-knowledge.
Yeah.
He really believed that understanding our own nature, the complexities of our hearts and minds, is essential to understanding God.
Absolutely. And he has that famous saying, right? He who knows himself knows his Lord.
Right.
And so that's really the starting point of the whole book, this idea that the journey to knowing God begins with an inward journey. It begins with exploring the depths of our own being.
I see. So it's not just about studying scriptures or performing rituals. It's about understanding who we are at our core.
Exactly. It's about looking within at our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own motivations, and trying to understand why we do the things we do, why we think the things we think.
And through that process of self-reflection, we can start to see glimmers of the divine.
Precisely. Because in al-Ghazali's view, the human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm. In other words, we are a reflection of the divine attributes. So by understanding ourselves, we can gain insights into the nature of God.
And so to illustrate this point, al-Ghazali uses a really powerful analogy, the analogy of the heart as a mirror.
Yes.
Right. So he says that if this mirror is clean and polished, it perfectly reflects the divine light.
It's a beautiful image, right?
Yeah.
It's like our hearts have this innate capacity to connect with the divine, but often that connection is blocked by our own impurities, our own attachments to worldly things.
So what are some of the things that cloud our hearts?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we get attached to that prevent us from seeing that divine light?
Well, al-Ghazali talks a lot about the dangers of worldly desires, right? Things like wealth and status and power. These things can be very seductive. They can promise us happiness.
Right.
But ultimately, they leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled because they're not addressing our true spiritual needs.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, right? Even if they haven't, read al-Ghazali.
Right.
I think there's that common human experience of chasing after things. thinking that they're going to bring us happiness,
Yeah.
and then realizing that, oh, it's not there.
Yeah. And I think that's why al-Ghazali's message is so timely.
Mm-hmm.
Because we live in a world that's constantly bombarding us with messages
Right.
about what we should want, what we should buy, what we should strive for. Yeah.
And it's so easy to get caught up in that, to lose sight of what truly matters.
So how do we go about polishing our hearts then? What are some practical steps that we can take to remove those impurities and make our hearts more receptive to the divine?
Well, al-Ghazali offers a range of practices, both internal and external. So on the internal level, it's about cultivating virtues. Things like humility, compassion, generosity, gratitude.
Yeah.
These are the qualities that help us to purify our hearts and make them more receptive to the divine light.
Okay. So it's about working on our character,
Yeah,
becoming better human beings.
exactly.
And how about external practices?
Well, al-Ghazali also talks a lot about the importance of things like prayer, fasting, meditation, the study of sacred texts.
Right.
These practices help us to connect with something larger than ourselves,
Yeah.
to align our will with the divine will,
Right.
to cultivate a sense of awe and reverence for the Creator. It's interesting because it's not just about doing good deeds or, performing rituals. It's about, like you said, cultivating the right inner disposition, the right state of heart.
Exactly. It's about the inner transformation that needs to happen in order for those outer practices to be truly meaningful.
So both are necessary. They go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
And this emphasis on the heart is really central, I think, to al-Ghazali's teachings.
Yeah. He saw the heart as the seat of both our intellect and our emotions.
Okay.
It's the place where reason and revelation meet.
Okay. So it's not about choosing between head and heart. It's about integrating them.
Right. It's about bringing our intellectual understanding into harmony with our deepest feelings and aspirations.
Yeah. And that's a really helpful framework, I think, for thinking about how we live our lives. It's not just about following rules or doctrines blindly.
Right.
It's about cultivating this deep inner awareness
Yeah.
that guides our actions and our interactions.
Exactly. And that awareness is cultivated through the practices we've been discussing. Purifying our hearts, engaging in those spiritual disciplines, and seeking knowledge,
Right.
both of the self
Mm.
and of the divine.
And speaking of knowledge, al-Ghazali had some fascinating things to say about the nature of knowledge and the role of the intellect in spiritual growth.
Right.
He wasn't content with just blind faith.
Right.
And he really believed that true knowledge
Yeah.
could lead to a deeper understanding of God.
Absolutely. Remember, he was a philosopher at heart. He believed in using reason and logic to explore the mysteries of faith. And he also believed that true knowledge wasn't just about accumulating facts.
Right.
It was about transformative understanding, about seeing the interconnectedness of all things. So he wasn't advocating for just book learning
Right.
or intellectual debates for the sake of debate. It was about a deeper kind of knowing,
Yeah.
a wisdom that comes from contemplation, from connecting the dots, from seeing the bigger picture.
So how do we cultivate that deeper kind of knowing, that wisdom?
Well, al-Ghazali talks about the importance of seeking knowledge from qualified teachers and mentors,
Right.
people who have already traversed the path,
Mm-hmm.
who can guide and support others on their spiritual journey. And he also emphasizes the importance of contemplation,
Right.
of reflecting deeply on the nature of reality, on the nature of God. And he also acknowledges, the limitations of human intellect, that there are some truths that are beyond the grasp of reason alone.
Right.
And that's where the importance of revelation comes in.
Yeah.
Of accepting that there are some things we can only know through divine guidance.
So finding that balance between reason and revelation,
Exactly.
using our minds to explore these mysteries of faith, but also recognizing those limits of human understanding.
Absolutely. And al-Ghazali believed that this balanced approach was essential for achieving true happiness, because he saw happiness not as this, fleeting emotion or a temporary pleasure, but as a state of deep inner fulfillment that comes from aligning oneself with the divine will.
And that brings us, I think, to another really key concept in al-Ghazali's work, which is this idea of the world as a temporary stage, right? As a place of preparation for our eternal journey.
It's such a powerful concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really challenges us to rethink our priorities
Right.
and detach ourselves from the fleeting allure of worldly possessions and status. He uses this analogy of the world as this deceptive old woman.
Ooh, I like this one. Tell me more about that.
So he says she appears beautiful and alluring at first,
Right.
tempting us with promises of pleasure and fulfillment. But as we get closer, as we become more entangled in worldly pursuits, we start to see her true nature.
Yeah, so it's about not being fooled by appearances.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface, considering the true worth of the things that we're chasing after.
Because ultimately what al-Ghazali is saying is that true lasting happiness is not found in those external things.
Right.
It's found in our relationship with God.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note, too, he's not saying that we should just renounce the world
Right.
and become hermits.
Yeah.
He recognizes the importance of living in the world, contributing to society, but it's about doing so with the right intention.
Right.
With a detachment from those worldly attachments.
Yeah. So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Between engaging with the world, but not being completely consumed by it.
It's about using the world as a means to an end, not as an end in itself.
And so to help us understand our place within this world, al-Ghazali presents this really fascinating idea of 3 kingdoms.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The animal, the vegetable, and the mineral.
And he's drawing on a lot of different intellectual traditions here, right?
Yeah.
He's looking at Greek philosophy. He's looking at Islamic cosmology. And he's trying to create this kind of this hierarchy of being that helps us to understand our place in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, it's about seeing the whole of creation.
Yeah.
From these simplest elements to the most complex organisms, and seeing them as all part of this grand design.
Right. And each kingdom has its own unique qualities, its own unique purpose. And by understanding those qualities and purposes, we can gain insights into our own nature and our own purpose.
Yeah. So how does he break down these 3 kingdoms then? What are the key characteristics of each one?
Well, he starts with the mineral kingdom, right?
Yeah.
Which is the most basic, the most inert,
Right.
the least complex. And then you have the vegetable kingdom,
Yeah.
which is characterized by growth and reproduction. And then finally you have the animal kingdom, which is characterized by consciousness and movement.
Right. And so human beings obviously belong to that animal kingdom.
Yes.
But we also possess something unique.
Right. We have this capacity for reason and intellect. And that sets us apart from all other creatures.
Right. And that's what allows us to know God.
Exactly. It's our intellect that allows us to contemplate the divine attributes.
Yeah.
To understand the nature of revelation, to engage in spiritual practices.
And to find that true lasting happiness that we were talking about earlier.
Precisely.
So al-Ghazali's view of the world and our place in it is incredibly complex and nuanced.
It is.
Right. He's not offering any easy answers.
No.
But he's giving us a framework.
Yeah.
For understanding the human condition, for understanding our relationship with God, and for ultimately finding our way back to that source of true happiness.
And I think it's important to note, too, that al-Ghazali's teachings are not just for Muslims, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's writing from an Islamic perspective, but his insights into human nature, into the spiritual path, they're universal.
Yeah.
They can resonate with people from all walks of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why the Alchemy of Happiness continues to be so relevant today, even though it was written centuries ago.
It speaks to that deep longing for meaning and purpose. That's, it's within all of us. It's regardless of our background or beliefs, we're all on this journey of trying to figure out who we are, why we're here, and what it all means. And al-Ghazali offers some really profound insights into that journey.
Yeah, and one of those insights, and this is something that we're going to delve into in much more detail, I think, in the next segment, is this idea of divine love.
Yeah. The importance of cultivating love for God.
Yeah. And he sees love as being the most essential element of faith, the most powerful force that can propel us toward spiritual growth.
Yeah. And it's not just this kind of sentimental feeling, right? It's a deep, transformative love that changes who we are.
Yeah. It's about aligning our will with God's will.
Yeah.
About finding joy in remembrance of him. About surrendering to his decree.
Absolutely.
And ultimately about experiencing that complete union of the lover and the beloved.
Which is the ultimate goal, right, of the spiritual path. It's about achieving that state of unity with the divine, where all sense of separation dissolves.
And it's interesting because al-Ghazali, he doesn't just talk about this in abstract terms. He actually gives very specific signs
Yeah.
of divine love.
Right.
So he's not leaving us to kind of wander around in the dark.
Right.
He's giving us a map.
Exactly. He's providing us with those guideposts to help us assess the authenticity of our love, our connection with the divine. And I think those 6 signs are a great place to pick up in our next segment because they offer a really practical way to apply al-Ghazali's teachings
Yeah.
to our own lives, to really assess, where we are on this spiritual path.
So join us for part 2.
Yeah.
We're going to delve into those 6 signs of divine love.
Absolutely. Unpack those practical implications for living a fulfilling and meaningful life.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. Welcome back to our deep dive into Imam al-Ghazali's The Alchemy of Happiness.
Now, before the break, we were talking about how important self-knowledge is.
Right, like that idea of polishing the mirror of our heart so we can really see the divine reflected back at us.
Yeah, and we started touching on the idea of divine love and how al-Ghazali gives us these 6 signs to kind of guide us.
Yes.
And I think these signs are really helpful because they offer a practical framework.
Yeah.
Right? For both recognizing, but also cultivating a genuine connection with God, right?
Absolutely.
So let's dive into those signs then, shall we? What's the first one?
Okay, so the first sign that al-Ghazali talks about is this idea of preferring God's pleasure above all else.
Okay.
Which, I mean, it sounds deceptively simple.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
It does.
But in practice, it can be quite challenging.
Yeah. Especially, I think especially in today's world, right, where we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should want and what's going to make us happy.
Totally. Our egos are always whispering in our ear, telling us to prioritize our own desires, our own comfort, our own sense of security. But al-Ghazali reminds us that true happiness lies in aligning our will with God's will.
Yeah. And it's not about denying our desires altogether, right? It's about understanding their place in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing, that our desires are often fleeting.
Yeah.
And ultimately insignificant compared to the eternal bliss of being in harmony with God. He uses this beautiful analogy of a garden.
Ooh, I like analogies. Tell me about it.
So he says, imagine a beautiful garden, right? Filled with fragrant flowers and lush trees. But in the middle of this garden, there's this giant weed that's just choking the life out of everything around it. And so that weed represents our unchecked desires.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this.
Right.
Yeah.
So our desires can be like that weed if we don't tend to them carefully.
Right.
They can take over and prevent, the garden of our heart from flourishing. But when we cultivate this first sign of divine love, when we prefer God's pleasure above all else, it's like we're gently uprooting that weed and giving the other plants, space to grow and thrive.
So it's about tending that garden.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first sign, right?
Yeah.
Preferring God's pleasure above all else.
Yeah.
What's the second sign?
Okay. The second sign that al-Ghazali talks about is finding joy in remembering God.
Okay. Now, I think this is one that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah.
Some people might think it's about just like, engaging in ritualistic practices or repeating certain phrases.
Right.
But I think there's a deeper meaning here, right?
Right. Absolutely. It's not just about outward expressions of remembrance.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a deep, abiding awareness of God's presence, like this connection that permeates every aspect of our being. He uses another analogy here.
Ooh, another one. Okay, I'm ready.
He says, imagine carrying a small, precious jewel in your pocket.
Okay.
You might not always be consciously aware of it,
right?
But it's there. And that knowledge just brings a sense of comfort and security.
Okay.
So remembering God is like carrying that jewel of his presence in our hearts.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about knowing that even when we're not actively engaging in prayer or any kind of formal practice, that God is still with us.
He's always there.
Yeah.
It's about integrating, our spiritual practice into our daily lives rather than compartmentalizing it.
So it's about finding those moments throughout the day where we can just pause and remember.
Yes. And even in those moments where we're not actively pausing, just to have that background awareness that God is present.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 signs down,
Yeah.
4 to go. What's the third sign of divine love?
The third sign is complete submission to God's will, even in the face of adversity.
Ooh, okay. This is a big one.
It is a big one.
And I think it's especially relevant
Yeah.
in today's world, right? Where there's so much uncertainty, so much anxiety.
So much suffering.
Yeah. And it's our natural instinct, I think, to resist pain,
Yeah.
right? To try to control our circumstances,
Totally.
to make things go the way we want them to go. But al-Ghazali is saying that we need to let go of that control, right? To surrender to God's will, even when it's difficult.
Yeah. To trust that even though we may not understand why things are happening the way they are,
Yeah.
God has a plan.
Yeah.
And that plan is for our ultimate good.
You know, he uses another analogy here, right?
Yeah.
Talking about a doctor who prescribes a bitter medicine
Yes.
to a sick patient.
Mhm.
And even though the patient might not understand why they have to take this medicine, they trust that the doctor knows what they're doing.
Yeah. So it's like we're the patient
Mm-hmm.
and God is the doctor.
And we have to trust, right, that even though it might not make sense to us in the moment, that there's a reason,
Absolutely.
and that ultimately it's for our own healing.
And this is where, the practice of surrender comes in. Right? It's about recognizing that, we're not in control of everything.
Yeah.
And that sometimes the most difficult experiences
Hmm.
are actually opportunities for growth
Yeah.
and transformation.
So it's about looking for those lessons,
Yeah.
even in the midst of those difficult times.
Absolutely. And al-Ghazali acknowledges that this is not easy.
Right. It's not.
Right. It's a process. And he offers a lot of different practices and advice on how to cultivate this kind of surrender. But ultimately, it comes down to faith, right? It comes down to trusting that
Right.
God knows what he's doing, even when we don't.
So surrendering to that bigger picture.
Yeah. That wisdom that's beyond our own limited understanding.
Yeah. Okay. 3 down, 3 to go.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the fourth sign of divine love?
The fourth sign is complete contentment with whatever God decrees.
Okay. So again, building on that idea of surrender,
Yes.
right? It's really an extension of that.
Okay, so it's not just about accepting the difficult things, it's about accepting everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about finding that inner peace and tranquility,
Yeah.
no matter what our external circumstances might be.
And again, I think that can be a really challenging concept for people to grasp.
Yeah, especially in today's world,
Yeah.
right? Where we're constantly told, you gotta strive for more, you gotta achieve more, you gotta be happier.
Right. So to just accept what is, can feel almost like giving up.
Yeah, or being passive.
Right. But that's not what al-Ghazali is saying at all. He's not saying that we should become complacent,
Okay.
or just sort of accept mediocrity. He's saying that we should still strive for excellence.
Well,
Right. We should still pursue knowledge. We should still contribute to the betterment of the world. But it's about doing so with the right intention
okay.
and with a detachment from the outcome. He uses another great analogy here. He talks about a farmer planting seeds,
Okay.
right? The farmer, he does everything in his power to create the right conditions for the seeds to grow.
Yeah.
He prepares the soil, he waters the plants, he protects them from pests. But ultimately, the farmer has no control over whether or not those seeds will actually sprout.
Yeah, he can't make them grow.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's about focusing on our efforts, on doing our part,
Right.
but recognizing that the ultimate outcome is in God's hands.
Right. So there's that element of trust again.
Exact
Yes, sir.
surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's contentment.
Contentment.
Right. Complete contentment.
Complete contentment with whatever God decrees.
And I think that leads us really nicely into the fifth sign,
Yeah.
right? Which is this idea of your whole heart being filled with God.
Yes.
This is a big one. This is a beautiful one.
It is a big
But
leap.
it's also one that I think can be hard to wrap our minds around,
Absolutely.
right? What does it actually mean to have your heart filled with God?
It's about experiencing, this profound sense of unity, of
Mhm.
interconnectedness with the divine. Al-Ghazali describes it as a state of being where God's presence becomes so pervasive that it just fills every corner of your being. It
Mhm.
transforms your thoughts, your emotions, your actions.
And so it's not just about believing in God intellectually anymore,
No.
right? It's about feeling God's presence in a very visceral, experiential way.
Absolutely.
And I think he uses another analogy to illustrate this point. Oh, does he ever love analogies?
I know. He does, doesn't he?
He does. He does. So what's this one?
So this one is about a drop of water falling into the ocean.
Okay.
And at first, the drop, it retains its individual form,
Mm-hmm.
right? But as it merges with the vastness of the ocean, it loses its separateness.
Yeah.
It becomes one.
One with the whole.
Right.
Yeah. So the drop represents our individual soul,
Okay.
and the ocean represents God.
I see. Yeah.
And so when our hearts are filled with God, it's like that drop merging with the ocean.
Yeah.
We lose our sense of separateness
Right.
and experience this profound sense of unity with the divine.
So it's that ultimate union,
It is.
right, that we're all striving for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I think this fifth sign,
Yeah.
it kind of encompasses all the previous signs, right?
Yeah.
If you've truly surrendered to God's will, if your heart is filled with remembrance
Mm-hmm.
and contentment, then it naturally follows that God would occupy the entirety of your being.
You're getting it.
Yeah, it's all connected. It's all intertwined.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to the sixth and final sign.
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
So the sixth sign that al-Ghazali talks about is experiencing overwhelming awe and love in God's presence. So it's almost like this ecstatic joy.
Yeah,
Right.
like this feeling of just being completely consumed
Mm-hmm.
by divine love.
Yeah, he describes it as this state of being where, the lover is so utterly absorbed in the beloved that all sense of separation just dissolves.
And so it's not just about love anymore.
Right.
Right. It's about awe.
Yes, it's about reverence.
It's about recognizing the majesty
Right.
and the beauty
Yeah.
of the divine. He compares it to a moth drawn to a flame.
Ooh, okay.
Right.
Sure.
The moth is so captivated by the
Mhm.
beauty and the radiance of the flame
Yeah.
that it just forgets everything else and flies straight into the heart of the fire.
So the moth represents the soul.
And the flame represents God.
Yeah.
And just as the moth is consumed by the flame,
Mm-hmm.
the soul that experiences this sixth sign of divine love is consumed by the love of God.
Okay. So this is like the ultimate goal
Right.
of the spiritual path.
To achieve that level of union,
Right.
of annihilation in the divine.
And it's interesting because the sixth sign,
Yeah,
it feels almost mystical, right?
it does.
It's hard to comprehend from our limited human perspective.
Yeah, and al-Ghazali acknowledges that, right? He says that this level of spiritual realization, it's attainable for anyone who is willing to dedicate themselves to the path.
Mm.
But he also acknowledges that it's a rare and precious gift,
Yeah.
and it requires immense effort and sacrifice to uncover. He compares it to a priceless jewel,
Hmm.
right? That's just buried deep beneath the earth,
Yeah.
and you have to, you have to dig and you have to sift through all the dirt and the rocks.
Yeah. To finally find that treasure.
Okay, so it's not about instant gratification.
No.
It's about this lifelong journey,
It is.
right, of spiritual transformation.
It's a process of refinement,
Yeah.
of purification, of drawing closer and closer to the divine.
Okay, so we've now gone through all six of al-Ghazali's signs of divine love.
Yes, we have. So we've covered all six of those signs of divine love.
We have. I feel like we should recap them quickly before moving on.
Yeah, definitely. So starting with the first sign, preferring God's pleasure above all else, right?
Putting God first.
Yeah, putting God first, prioritizing his will above our own desires, even though it might be difficult.
Yeah, it's about aligning our will with God's will.
Exactly. And then the second sign, finding joy in remembering God.
Yeah, that constant awareness.
Right, that abiding awareness of God's presence.
Integrating our spiritual practice into our daily lives.
Absolutely. And then the third sign, complete submission to God's will, even in the face of adversity.
That surrender.
Yeah.
Trusting that God has a plan, even when we don't understand.
And that plan is ultimately for our own good.
Hmm.
Okay, and then the fourth sign, complete contentment with whatever God decrees.
Finding that inner peace.
Yeah.
That tranquility.
Regardless of our external circumstances.
Right. Accepting everything, the good and the bad.
Yes, exactly. And then that fifth sign, your whole heart being filled with God.
That profound sense of unity.
Yes, that union with the divine, where we lose our sense of separateness.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then finally, that sixth sign, experiencing overwhelming awe and love in God's presence.
Yeah, that's where it all culminates.
It does. It's like
Okay.
that ultimate goal of the spiritual path. to achieve that level of closeness with God.
Yeah. So these 6 signs, I mean, they really offer like a roadmap, I think,
They do. They're like, yeah, those guideposts along the way.
for navigating the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And they give us, a way to measure our progress.
Right, to kind of check in with ourselves and see like, okay, am I cultivating these qualities in my life? Am I, experiencing these states of being?
Yeah. And to remember that
Mm-hmm.
it's a journey,
Yes.
right? It's not a destination.
Absolutely. It's about that ongoing process of growth and transformation.
Yeah. So al-Ghazali, through the Alchemy of Happiness, he really gives us like this incredible framework,
Mm-hmm.
right, for understanding ourselves,
Yeah.
for understanding our relationship with God,
Mm-hmm.
and for ultimately finding our way back
Yeah.
to that source of true happiness.
To that primordial state of fitra.
Yeah, that state of purity and innocence that we're all born with.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good place to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's so much more we could say.
Right. Always is with al-Ghazali.
Always is with al-Ghazali. But hopefully this has given our listeners, a good overview
Yeah.
of some of the key themes
That is teaching.
of his teachings
Yeah.
and inspired them to maybe pick up the Alchemy of Happiness themselves.
Yeah, and if you haven't already read it, I
Mhm.
highly recommend it.
Absolutely.
It's a really life-changing book.
It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about al-Ghazali.
Yeah. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Echoes of Ihsan.